so that we may become the servants of others. Take our lips and speak through them, our minds and think through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for Christ's sake. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Paul and Anne, for inviting me here today. I do think, like some of you, it might be payback in some way, since I traveled across the country from the West Coast last night and then had daylight savings time on top of that. So for me, it's about 7:15. But you all look awake, and I am too, so we'll go from here. There was a great little Facebook post on daylight savings time, and it had the people moving the stones at Stonehenge. And two men said, "I hate daylight savings." For over 13 years, I heard that prayer I opened with whenever my rector, George Regas, was preaching. He retired 21 years ago, and the prayer still echoes in my mind and stirs my soul. The last time I heard him preach, he started with that prayer, and it seemed at that point as if God did, in the words of today's collect, bring into order the unruly wills and affections of all of us. That opening prayer, asking God to help us overcome our weaknesses so we can serve others, spoke to me as I read today's gospel and lessons. John's gospel appointed for today tells the story of Mary, the sister of Lazarus, anointing the feet of Jesus with outrageously expensive oil. Some commentators suggest that the cost of the nard she used was the equivalent of a year's earnings. Imagine anointing the feet of someone with such costly lotion and then wiping it off with your hair. Of course, some of us don't have enough hair to do that, but those who do might question such action even more. I wonder if we can even comprehend such devotion. And then there's Judas, who we can always rely on for being the foil, chastising Mary for such extravagant affection. In other Gospels, Judas is not mentioned. Other disciples decry the waste. It matters not whether Judas was sincere or other disciples spoke out. For what we hear this morning is more about Mary's outpouring of affection and commitment to Jesus, compared to how her gift might have been, perhaps, better used. In my 30-plus years of working with churches across the United States and Canada, I've often heard similar discussions. Why should we spend resources on fixing up the church, building a new organ, or creating beautiful worship, when there are so many other things we should be doing? Feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, healing the sick, etc., etc. I pity the poor rector or vestry who responds the way Jesus did. Can you imagine Paul saying, "The poor will always be with us"? He might not lose his life, but the next few weeks or months might be very difficult for him. 25 years ago or so, my church, All Saints in Pasadena, was contemplating renovating the sanctuary and building a new building for education and outreach. The committee doing the work concentrated on the sanctuary and was planning on presenting the initial designs of the sanctuary first. On the vestry, I argued that education and outreach was what the church was really about, and we should lead with that. but the committee had done its work on the sanctuary design first and was anxious to present it. The designs were received politely. 3 weeks after presenting the sanctuary design, the committee presented the plans for the education and outreach building. At the church-wide meeting, one 90-year-old woman who had been a member, I think, since the turn of the 20th century, stood up and angrily said, "I'm so glad to see you working on the mission building instead of the assault on the sanctuary." In essence, she was demanding, how could you suggest spending so extravagantly on worship when we should be about serving the poor? In today's gospel and in the story from my church, the basic argument is the same. Resources are limited, so we must concentrate on serving others rather than worshiping and healing ourselves. But the psalmist sings of a different reality. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are glad indeed. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses of the Negev. Those who sowed with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, will come again with joy, shouldering the sheaves. Can we own that joy? Can we believe that we worship a God whose generosity knows no bounds? It's not easy, I know. We are bombarded with messages from advertisers and politicians, especially these days here in Ohio, that resources are limited. That we have to toil and fight for everything we have, and we always need more. We give in to those messages at our peril, for we lose sight of the richness of God's creation as we are blinded by the desire for more things. When we fall prey to the belief that there's never enough, we can sincerely believe that we should concentrate on helping others with limited resources. But Isaiah reminds us of God's abundance. For I give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people. Why is it that the poor are less worried about having enough than the wealthy? How can the poor be more generous as a percentage of their income than the wealthy? Why do poor churches seem to worship more extravagantly while still serving those who are in more need than they are? Is it because perhaps they are more willing to accept all that they have as blessings rather than always wanting more? Could it be that they have learned to be grateful for God's abundant love and can be extravagant in loving God back? There is nothing to suggest in today's gospel that Mary was incredibly rich. Yet she loved Jesus so deeply that she anointed him with expensive oil. We don't know whether or not she helped the poor. We just know she worshiped Jesus and honored the one she loved. For Jesus, that was enough. For Jesus, Mary was living his commandment to love one another as I have loved you. In my opening prayer, I ask God to help us be masters of ourselves so we can become the servants of others. For Mary, God did that. For us, it's a constant struggle. We have to master our desire to have more, our desire to be recognized, our desire to succeed at all costs, our desire to be in charge, our need to control all outcomes. Only by mastering our own weaknesses can we truly serve others. My hope for each of us as Christians is that we see Mary's sacrificial anointing as an example of how we might worship together. I hope we celebrate God's generosity to us through Jesus with wild abandon. 25 years ago in Pasadena, we didn't raise enough money to renovate the sanctuary and build a new building for education and outreach. So we chose renovating the sanctuary as a way to empower our worship so we could gain strength for the journey into a strong, progressive witness and transformational ministry. As you experience here at St. Mark's, deeply meaningful worship does give us strength for the journey. Powerful celebrations nourish us to do the work God puts before us. Before we can serve others, we must overcome our failings. And I believe we can only do that through transformational worship. Let us not be afraid to be extravagant in such worship. Take our lips and speak through them, our minds and think through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for Christ's sake. Amen.